Hi there, it's Peta from Crafty Crusaders again. Now today I'm going to show you a new technique using Mepxy markers, and you can see that I'm tracing out a set of wings out of a butterfly and moth book. Now I can draw wings, but I really like the way that you can just trace onto Canson Tracing paper, and you use the actual details contained within the wings, and they vary so much. So I've got a yen today to do a bit of a girl with some butterfly wings, and I thought I would show you this technique that I've found of using Mepxy markers on tracing paper. So while I'm tracing these wings out, and you can see that I'm doing two of the left wing, and that's because I had a yen to kind of fan them out on one side of the girl. So what I'm actually going to do is add some details now in. I'm just adding some finer details in, and these were not on the original drawing, but I like having some white highlights on wings, and it just finishes it off for me, and I really love it. Now what I'm actually going to do is pull out the Mepxy markers after I then turn these upside down. So the trick, and I'm using a waterproof, fade-proof ink pen, but you see I've turned it upside down, so I'm actually going to colour in the other side of the markers, the drawing, so the black will never ever smudge because you are not going on that side, and it shows through enough to actually never have to turn it over. So now what I'm doing is I'm using the alcohol markers with some pale yellow, then some orange, and then some lemon, and I'll put the numbers for the markers that I've used actually in the blog, so that if you have these markers you know what I used as my rough colour palette. But one of the things that I love about this particular technique is that, and because this is a non-porous surface, the alcohol markers, they actually reactivate whenever you add more in. And yes, they blend really well, but what you will find is that if I was to say draw circles like I am now, you can see that the previous alcohol ink is actually moving away, and you can see these beautiful, gentle, subtle patterns occurring within the markers, and you can see all those different delineations, and they do not blend as well as they do on Canson bleed proof paper, for example, but I love the beautiful intricacies. And if you think about patterns in nature, they often have ripples and not just monochromatic blocking of patterns or colors. They often have ripples and highlights and lowlights, and the beautiful thing that I found about doing this was that I can create those textures and patterns within this design, and you'll see it when I blend these. So now I'm just adding in some black spots on those bottom wings. Have a look and see what I do now with the brown and how that blends, and it smudges and it moves together. And I don't know about you, but if you've seen many pictures of butterflies, you will know that they are blending incredibly well together, and that looks really interesting and kind of like it's not a colour blocked technique. And so you can see now that I'm adding dots in, and when you look closely you can see that that dot, the colour pulls around it, and then the colour draws away from the alcohol content in that colour. And I just find that really, really interesting for the way that you can create texture on tracing paper. So now I'm deciding that I'm going to add in some additional details, and each of the wings is just slightly different because of the way that I drew those lines. And I'm defining them more and more and more. You can see all those little dots that I'm putting in here. See how they pull? But if I was to go in very close, you would see that the colour ebbs away from around where that dot is, and that highlights it a lot better. So now I'm using a white pen to just go in and highlight the white highlights that I've got here, because on any butterfly and moth, most of them actually have some white highlights, so I like to add some in. And it just gives layer after layer, and I love that. I love that, the way that it's working at the moment. And that's just about done. I'm just adding in some veining, just to add a little bit of depth and texture, but that's it for those wings. Now I've cut them out. So I've drawn one of my girls, and now I'm using some watercolors and some gouache to actually color her face in. Now there are some lovely Hobram watercolors in the Schminker range, and Canson has the full suite of products for paints, and I'm actually using a gouache as well. I like doing that because it's not completely translucent, so I'm adding in some shadows, and this is just really this is a raw sienna. I'm just adding some color and some shadows to her face, and I like to do it in warmer colors. I could be doing this in neutrals or different colors altogether, but this just suits my purposes. And I work in watercolors. I find that when I do girls and shading in watercolors, I find that it's much faster, easier, and just works better. For me, I am such a watercolor girl, and I do enjoy the simpleness of them. And I'm actually going to use, I've used some sprays on the background and just let them dry naturally. You can see that I've already popped the wing in, and this girl I drew on some Canson drawing paper, and because I wanted to transplant her in, and I wanted to pop the wing underneath her so that it was very evident that it was coming from underneath her, and that would be hard if I was drawing or painting over it. So I'm going to pull out my Schmink inks now. I love Schmink inks. They're my favourite inks. They are just absolutely vibrant. You can see here that I've got some magenta. I'm putting the first layer of hair in, and I'm doing it with an aqua brush, and I'm using the ink. And I'm using it like a watercolour here. And I'm letting the water coming through on the aqua brush to give light and shade. And I'll keep texturizing this until I'm happy with it. So I was happy with it. So now I'm going to get some orange and put some yellow Schmink ink into that. Some red, sorry, and make an orange with the Schmink. So now I'm using that like a watercolor, and these dry permanent, and they are incredibly vibrant, and they are completely translucent. That's what I love about them. There's no sediment in the inks. So now I'm just putting the shadows and some definition into this girl's dress, and I wanted it to have not a tie-dyed look, but something really weathered and worn. And I've got a lot of ink left over, so I'm actually going to highlight her hair and change the colour of her hair, because I really think nobody's hair is just monochromatic or the one colour. So now what I'm doing is I've got a lot of this ink left over, and so now I'm just putting it onto the next page, and it will form the next background for my next page. I'm also using the magenta ink here just to give some different textures with it. And I'm loving the weathered look that I'm getting with this. You see the water, and I've just, so what I did was I sprayed water on it because this dries permanent, so before it's dry you can spray water on it and then have that weathered look and blot some off. So I'm back to the girl, and I'm going to do her eyes, and I'm using just some plain markers. And now I'm just using a fine line micron pen and some plain markers just to highlight those areas. I've got a little bit of grey pencil here. You could use a graphite pencil, because when you do eyes, of course the eyeball is not the shape of the eye socket, it is actually round. We need to put some additional shadows in here, and I like using colour pencil rather than graphite because it doesn't smudge so much. I'm using a paper stump here just to smudge it a little bit, but not too much. So now I'm putting some highlights in with a white pen. And these are natural highlights that we have on our faces. And some lashes, just blacking in those eyebrows. They could be in a dark brown too, but I didn't mind having that. Now I'm going to use a colour pencil to put in my saying, and I use that instead of a Mepxy marker here because the rest of the page looks inky, and all I wanted to do was have a real sketchy look for my words, and I chose that carefully. I'm also just putting in a little bit of definition into those beautiful inky hair with a little bit of pencil, and this is what mixed media is all about. You can use lots of different things to give lots of different looks. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this lesson today. I really encourage you to give your Mepxy markers a go on tracing paper if you want to have that really kind of translucent look, something that looks almost lifelike, I think, and it looks gorgeous. So I'm just using that pencil now to finish off the page. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson today, and give it a go yourself. Experiment.